She signed the divorce papers without a word. That was the part nobody could understand. No tears. No yelling. No begging. Just silence. Calm, cold silence. While her husband sat across the table with his arms folded and the scent of another woman still clinging to his jacket, Elena simply picked up the pen and signed her name like she was signing a receipt, not ending 11 years of her life. His mother sat in the corner with a satisfied smile. They thought it was over. They thought Elena had nothing left. No career. No savings. No future without their family name attached to hers. But they were wrong. And what happened next stunned every single one of them. To understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to go back 11 years earlier. Elena was 24 when she met Daniel Hargrove. He was charming in the kind of way that makes people trust him instantly. He always knew what to say. He had plans, goals, confidence. And when you stood next to him, you felt safe inside his future. Elena came from a very different world. She grew up in a tiny apartment with her mother and younger brother after her father disappeared when she was 9. She knew what quiet poverty felt like. Not dramatic movie poverty. Real poverty. The kind where you wear shoes until they hurt because there's no money for new ones. The kind where dinner repeats itself 3 nights in a row because that's all there is. So when Daniel came into her life with his warmth and certainty, she held on tightly. Of course she did. 2 years later, they got married. But Daniel's family never truly accepted her. His mother smiled politely at the wedding, but her eyes always stayed cold. His sister barely acknowledged her. His father tolerated her at dinner parties without ever really learning who she was. Still, Elena believed Daniel loved her. And because she believed that, she sacrificed everything. She gave up her business degree when Daniel's career required them to move. She told herself it was temporary. Then came the house. The dinners. The endless social events. His elderly mother moving in. Elena became the woman who managed everything behind the scenes while Daniel climbed higher and higher in his career. She cooked. Organized. Austede client. Smoothed over problems before they became problems. Slowly, quietly, her own life disappeared inside someone else's comfort. But here's the dangerous thing about losing yourself slowly. You rarely notice it happening. At first, every sacrifice feels reasonable. Every compromise feels temporary. You keep saying, things will settle down after this. But they never do. And one morning, Elena looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and realized something terrifying. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted. Not Daniel. Not his family. Not even herself. That question sat heavily inside her chest. So that night, she finally tried to tell Daniel how she felt. "I think I've lost myself," she said quietly. Daniel barely looked up from his phone. "You have everything," he told her. "A beautiful home. A good life. What exactly is the problem?" And that answer changed something inside her. But not immediately. Not yet. Because 3 months later, everything became impossible to ignore. She found the messages by accident. Daniel's phone was already unlocked. A conversation with a woman named Cassandra from his office. The same woman who once smiled at Elena during a company dinner and said, "Daniel talks about you all the time." The messages stretched back 8 months. 8 months of lies. Elena didn't scream. She didn't confront him. Instead, she walked calmly into the kitchen, made herself tea, and sat alone at the table she had chosen for a house that suddenly no longer felt like hers. And sitting there in silence, something unexpected happened. Not grief. Not rage. Something sharper. Something colder. Awareness. And that's when Elena started paying attention. She noticed the late nights. The hidden phone screens. The passwords. The careful way Daniel tilted conversations away from certain subjects. She noticed his mother avoiding eye contact whenever Cassandra's name came up. She began asking herself practical questions for the first time in years. What did she actually own? What was in her name? What would happen if this marriage ended tomorrow? The answers terrified her. The house belonged to Daniel. Their investments were controlled by his financial advisor. Their joint account held only $4,200. That was all she could access after 11 years of marriage. $4,200. Elena sat frozen in front of the screen, realizing how completely dependent she had become. Daniel thought she had nothing. His family thought she had wasted her life. But there was one thing they didn't know. Elena had never completely stopped being smart. Years earlier, Daniel briefly considered opening a restaurant. Elena had spent months researching business plans, suppliers, marketing strategies, and operations before he suddenly lost interest and abandoned the idea. But Elena kept every file, every note. Quietly, privately, she continued studying markets because she genuinely loved it. Then 5 years earlier, an old university friend named Priya convinced her to make a tiny investment in a startup company. Just $2,000. Money Elena secretly saved little by little from household budgeting. She barely thought about it afterward. Until now. She opened an old personal email account Daniel didn't even know existed. Buried inside were quarterly investment reports she had ignored for years. She clicked the latest one. And suddenly her entire world shifted. The startup had exploded in value. Acquired by a massive global company. Elena read the numbers once. Then twice. Then 3 times because her brain refused to accept them. Her tiny investment had become a fortune. Real money. Life-changing money. She sat motionless in the kitchen for nearly 40 minutes. Then she picked up the phone and called Priya. "I need a lawyer," she said. And that call changed everything. The lawyer's name was Diane Marsh. 61 years old. Sharp as glass. The kind of woman who walked into a room and made people nervous without raising her voice. Elena flew out to meet her quietly, using a credit card she had secretly opened months earlier. Diane listened carefully as Elena explained everything. The affair. The sacrifices. The finances. The years she spent holding Daniel's life together while her own disappeared. When Elena finished, Diane folded her hands calmly and said, "You have more power than you think." Because while Daniel believed Elena was passive, she had been preparing. Quietly documenting everything. Every event she hosted. Every client dinner she managed. Every unpaid contribution to Daniel's career and social image. Diane explained something Elena had never considered before. Unpaid labor still has value. Sacrifice has value. 11 years of supporting someone's success has value. But the biggest shock was still waiting. The divorce proceedings began exactly the way Daniel expected. Confident. Controlled. He acted reasonable. Generous. Even. His lawyer offered Elena the $4,200 in the joint account, a small monthly payment for 2 years, and permission to keep her personal belongings. Daniel honestly thought she would accept it. Then Diane opened her folder. And suddenly the room changed. One by one, she laid out every documented contribution Elena had made over 11 years. Every dinner. Every relocation. Every unpaid responsibility. She attached real financial value to every sacrifice Elena made to support Daniel's rise. Daniel's lawyer stopped smiling. His mother's confident expression slowly disappeared. Then Diane placed one final document on the table. Elena watched Daniel read it. And for the first time in years, he actually looked at her. Not with annoyance. Not with dismissal. With fear. "What is this?" he asked quietly. "A personal investment," Elena replied. It was the only sentence she spoke during the entire meeting. The number on that page changed everything. The room suddenly filled with whispered conversations and nervous calculations. Daniel's side requested recess after recess. The tone completely shifted. Because the woman they thought was helpless had quietly become wealthier than any of them imagined. The final settlement looked nothing like Daniel's original offer. Elena received compensation for her documented marital contributions. The house was sold and the equity divided fairly. And her personal investment remained completely untouched. Entirely hers. 6 weeks later, something happened that Daniel's family would never forget. A private jet landed at the small regional airport near the coastal town where the Hargroves hosted their annual family reunion. Elena wasn't invited, of course, but Priya owned a nearby house and invited Elena for a small gathering with old university friends. When Elena stepped off the jet wearing a cream silk blouse and dark sunglasses, people noticed. And news travels fast in small towns. By the second hour of the family reunion, whispers had already started spreading through the party. Someone saw Elena arrive. Someone mentioned the jet. Someone mentioned the settlement. Someone mentioned the fortune connected to her investment. Margaret heard the rumors and reportedly went silent. Daniel heard them next. And suddenly the woman they dismissed as invisible became impossible to ignore. But here's the strange part. Elena never went near the reunion. She didn't want revenge. She didn't need drama. She had nothing left to prove. Instead, she spent the evening sitting peacefully on Priya's porch watching the sun disappear over the water. And for the first time in years, she felt free. Real freedom. Not the exhausted numbness of giving up. Real peace. The kind that comes when you stop needing other people to recognize your worth before you recognize it yourself. In the months that followed, Elena moved to a new city. Not back home. Not anywhere connected to Daniel. Somewhere entirely her own. She rented an apartment with sunlight pouring through the windows and silence that finally felt comforting instead of lonely. She met with Diane and began planning the future. She had enough money to never work again. But that wasn't what she wanted. She wanted to build something. So she did. Elena launched a consulting company focused on market strategy and operations. The kind of behind-the-scenes business work she had always been naturally good at. She brought Priya on board. Then 2 other women who had spent years being underestimated in their own lives. Quiet women. Sharp women. Women who learned how to survive by paying attention. And within 18 months, the business thrived. Because people who spend years unnoticed often become incredibly observant. They see details everyone else misses. And when they finally stop shrinking themselves to fit inside someone else's expectations, they build things the right way. Daniel eventually married Cassandra. The wedding was extravagant. Social media loved it. Elena accidentally saw one of the photos online once. And to her own surprise, she felt absolutely nothing. No anger. No heartbreak. Just distance. Her life had moved somewhere else entirely. And maybe that's the real lesson in Elena's story. The world often mistakes quiet people for weak people. It assumes that someone who sacrifices, adjusts, and stays silent must have nothing inside them. But silence is not emptiness. Sometimes silence is survival. Sometimes silence is strategy. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one paying the closest attention. Elena didn't win because she got lucky. She won because some small part of her refused to disappear completely. Even after years of being overlooked. Even after years of giving pieces of herself away. That stubborn little voice inside her stayed alive long enough to save her. And maybe that's why the image of her stepping off that private jet mattered so much. Not because of the money. Not because of revenge. But because it was the first time in years she looked fully like herself again. Calm. Certain. Free. Not walking into someone else's world. Walking back into her own life.